This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from Open LMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in edtech, spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And Open LMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver effective, customized, and engaging learning experiences for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the eLearn podcast. My name is Ladek. I'm here with Conrad Gottfredson. How are you today, sir?
I'm wonderful. It's great to be with you and to be able to talk about some of my favorite subjects.
Oh no, I know this. I'm really excited for this conversation. Before we get started, though, we have guests on this podcast from around the world. Where do we find you sitting today?
I am in my home office in Alpine, Utah, just south of Salt Lake City.
Ooh.
Yeah.
So middle of October,
beautiful granite mountains all around. Right. So
middle of October. Has snow already fallen in?
No, not yet. So in the high country, we've had some snowfall. I was up in the mountains the other day and ran into some snow, but the leaves are just falling from the trees. A beautiful color here right now.
That's great. As I do for everybody who comes on the podcast, if you wouldn't mind, could you take the next couple of minutes here and just if anybody, for the people who haven't heard of you yet, could you just kind of introduce yourself and give us who you are and why you're here in this learning universe?
Well, I'm an old guy. I've been at this work since 1984. That's when I completed my PhD at Brigham Young University in the graduate program of instructional science. That became instructional psychology and technology, but it was a three-pronged graduate program looking at learning research, instructional research, learning theory, all of that. Secondly, evaluation, and third, evaluation measurement, and third, of course, is instructional design. And so that took me into the real world job in 1984, where I came face to face with the realities of organizational learning and realized that that's very different from institutional learning. That we see sometimes the academic world, and so I've spent my entire career since working with organizations, helping them figure out how to be more effective in enabling effective performance on the job, which is what learning is all about.
Fantastic. I love it. And you are one of the founders and the authors of the 5 Moments of Need, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I discovered my first week out of graduate school, was that there was more to learning than learning new and learning more. And that there was this amazing moment called apply, when people have to do something. And then in that apply, there's the moment of change, when things change, or solve when things go wrong. So that just emerged in 1984 in the real world of work. And that framework then began to shape everything that I've done since, and brought about the development of a very powerful instructional design methodology.
Fantastic. One question I wanted to ask you, because I've seen lots of PhDs at the end of people's names, but I've never seen an RWE, and so I don't know what that means. I hate to call myself out, but what's RWE mean?
That's real world experience. And
nice.
Without real world experience, that PhD isn't worth a lot. It got me started, and it certainly helped me develop a discipline to challenge the status quo, and the skills that I need to look at research and challenge it, in all of that. But the real growth, the real development of my professional career has been in the real world, and that real world experience informs everything that we do.
Fantastic. And I would just want to, as you know, we're broadcasting this live right now, and so we have a comment here. I just wanted to acknowledge Yulia Sheltonova for saying hello. She's just chiming in, saying she's excited for this conversation, which is great.
Good.
So what we want to talk about today is what is true workflow learning. So over here at Open LMS, we have Love the Way You Learn. There's lots of organizations that are out there in the learning space saying, workflow learning is where it's at. And that's where, you want to focus a lot of your time. It may not apply so much to the higher education space or not, but how do you define this? How do you define what is workflow learning? What does that mean?
Well, for us, there's a huge difference between learning from the workflow and learning while in the workflow doing your work. And so the real power of workflow learning is learning while working. That's very different than my just being in the workflow and my accessing a little video or a brief learning clip, micro learning element, if you will. That's because I stop work to learn then. It may be for a short amount of time, but anytime I stop work to learn, that is costly to an organization. And it's one part of learning. But what we do formally in the world of formal learning just initiates the learning process. There is so much more to learning than that initial stage of bringing into our brain information and figuring out how to act upon that information. Real learning happens over time as I develop expertise at the moment of apply, when things go wrong, moment of solve, when I unlearn to relearn, which all happens in the workflow. And I might learn new and learn more through the experiences that I have. And I can actually do that with the right kind of support, where I haven't ever done anything, but at 2 clicks, 10 seconds, I get to the steps. I follow those steps, and I complete a task. Well, I've learned something. Now, when I do that 5 times with the help of that in-place support system, am I learning? Absolutely. And so learning while working is at the heart of workflow learning, not suggesting that accessing micro learning elements and so forth isn't a part of it, but the more that you stop work to learn, the closer you are to traditional learning. You've just broken it up and spread it out over time. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And so I want to break down, like, let's just maybe take me through either a client that you've processed that you've worked with or whatever, where, how do I identify moments where my staff are learning in the flow of work? Or, as maybe as a learning designer or somebody who's the head of that L&D department, we can say, hey, look, we've really noticed that this happens a lot in X moment or during this process. Let me just stop there. Like, where do you start by in identifying this in an organization or with a particular job or et cetera?
Well, it all begins with us taking a hard look at this full scope of what our profession is responsible for doing. What is it that we really bring to the organization, and what is the full scope of that work? I would suggest that most organizations are taking a very narrow view, and historically have taken a very narrow view and focused all of the resources on a very narrow part of the entire scope that should be ours, and that is ours in the world of organizational learning. Let me illustrate that. Um, training, training is the first part of this journey that people are on in an organization. I've got and traditionally what that means is I stop my work and I attend a course. That may be a self-directed or self-learning course, e-learning, or it may be a face-to-face, or it might be a virtual, and it might be for 2 hours or whatever it is. But I'm stopping work to learn. Well, that's my first phase. That's the first step in the learning process. But at some point, then I have to return to work and transfer whatever it is that I learned to my world of work. So there's the training part, and then there's the transfer of that. That is a dicey world, where because according to Ebbinghaus research, I start forgetting. And although there's been some discussion of the degree in which people forget, they do forget. And it is
tons. I mean, they forget like 90% or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pulling stats out of nowhere. I'm making that up, but it's a huge amount as soon as I walk out of that training.
It's a rapid descent.
Right.
And so I've got to prop that up. And few organizations today have built into their whole learning process a support infrastructure to support a learner, that once that learner leaves the classroom, of whatever that classroom is, that learning experience, that supports them to that journey of personal competence. I may have achieved some level of mastery in my learning, but I've got to transfer that to real skilled performance on the job. So there's transfer. And then once I have fought and battled my way to where I can really perform, then I'm in the sustainment phase, right? If I don't do something for a long period of time, I may forget, or things change. And if I've been doing something over and over and over again to where it becomes automated in my skill set, and suddenly I'm asked to no longer do it that way, but to do it a new way, that is one of the most significant training challenges that any performer faces, to unlearn a deeply ingrained skill and replace it with a new one. And you're not going to do that with just formal training. You can't. No organization can invest in it. So you need, again, this support infrastructure that begins in the classroom, where a trainer can support people, use that to support people and build a dependence upon that support infrastructure, rather than the trainer that carries them through the transfer into the sustain, as they sustain and evolve and change and grow and develop expertise and become what they need to become for the organization. That was a long answer to your question.
But I love it. What I want to call out in that is the piece there where, we arrive at competence at some point in a profession. We arrive at a place where I know what I'm doing. I feel comfortable doing it. And you get that routine. But then you said, the most difficult thing is to unlearn and then actually make that shift, right? And we're experiencing that in such upheavals, over the last, year here with the the intervention of AI, but also just in general over the last 5 to 10 years, as more and more technology and more pieces come into our workplace with the pandemic, et cetera.
Yeah. Hey, could I suggest something to you?
Please.
We can arrive at competence, but we never arrive at expertise.
Well, so this is, but and again, you like literally just, what I love is that you just went where I was going. We're having a great synergy here, in that I'm wondering how is this what we call a mindset? Is this a place where you get to and say, hey, look, I'm always going to be, there's always that tender edge, right? Of I need to be either lifting or growing or expand, like somehow, am I getting that right?
Yeah. So I've been in a few years ago, I had to have a heart valve replaced. And it was a genetic thing from childhood. And the doctor told me at any point your valve could just fail, and that's not a good thing. So he says, you need to have it replaced. And I said, well, do you have some recommendations? And he did, of who I should have replace my valve. Now, I wasn't interested when I began talking to those physicians and their teams about who was going to replace my heart valve. I didn't care where they went to school. I didn't care about the grades they got in their class. What I cared about was their experience and their expertise. I wanted to know, how many of these surgeries have you done? And how successful have they been? Tell me how your team has worked. I wanted expertise. And expertise is something that continually grows as we work in an area and things go wrong. And so we fail and solve. When we change and grow, when we, at the moment of apply. And we haven't focused on building and putting in place an infrastructure that builds expertise, and feeds expertise, and shares the expertise of others with those who have less expertise. And that's what that infrastructure, we call it a digital coach. It's a really, Gloria Geary came up with the definition of what she called an EPSS, which is what we call a digital coach, which can do all of that. Can help us in the train, transfer, sustain, and can make the difference and continually build expertise. That's what she envisioned in 1990.
Wow.
That we're just barely seeing now emerge as a very powerful capability. Sadly, there are so many organizations that are so caught up in the train piece and investing everything in these training events that they don't understand this broader responsibility that we have to enable and sustain effective job performance in the flow of work, and to grow people's expertise in their capacity to do that.
So we've arrived at a place where, let's just assume at a stage, that we're working with a client, or you're working with a client who's recognized this, right? Who says, we need to shift. What's your first recommendation about those first steps? Is there a diagnosis process? Is there a let's look at what we do, or is there hey, we just need to completely wipe the slate clean and kind of restart from scratch?
No. I don't ever believe in starting from scratch. That's a scary proposition. Not too long ago, I published a blog article. It began by praising what we do in the world of training, and I've since wondered if it was a mistake, because it didn't garner as many reads as sometimes when I'm challenging. But what I was trying to suggest is, let's broaden our view. We can, with the right methodology and the technology in place, with the same level of effort and energy that we're spending right now on building these stellar training event-based solutions, we can actually build a comprehensive 5 moments of need solution. We can, with the same footprint of effort. We just have to do it differently. And that's what has driven the development of a methodology that we call Enable. It's an instructional design methodology. It's flipping ADDIE on it's turning ADDIE into an agile instructional design process. And so in Enable, the EN is engaged to align. That's where what we do with an organization is we look at the challenges and the opportunities that are driving requests for learning, and what are the measurable outcomes up front. And that drives us to then moving into the analyze to design phase, the A part of it, analyze to design, where you analyze and design simultaneously. And that's where we map the workflow, and where we develop the learning experience and performance plan and do all of these things so that you can rapidly then build align your learning experience, what you have, with the workflow. Can I just, those who are listening, one of the greatest mistakes that has ever been made in the history of learning is that we have failed to align how we train with how people do their jobs, which requires us to map the workflow up front and then to align training with it. I don't know if anyone has ever heard somebody whisper after training, listen, forget everything that they told you in training. I'm going to show you how it's really done here. Well, that is the true test or the example of where training is not aligned. Training can be performance-based, but still not aligned with how people do their job. And it's like if I were to ask you to recite the letters of the alphabet backwards by every third letter, go.
Woo! I couldn't even begin. Z,
Right.
the W, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. And the reason why is I'm asking you to retrieve from your memory information in a way that is different from how you encoded it. Right? We do this all the time in training. We train one way, and then when they get in the workplace, they're needing to retrieve from however they encoded it in training, retrieve that and align it with how they do their job. And it's like trying to recite the letters of the alphabet backwards by every third letter. And so of all the things that we could do to improve training today, we want to transfer and sustain, certainly, but if we would align how we train with how people do their jobs, that would be transformative in the power of the investment that organizations make in learning.
How much of this are you starting to see already today in terms of using virtual or augmented reality in order to run simulations? An emphasis towards, mentorship, peer learning, those types of things, in terms of using that as a methodology. I'm trying to think of a couple other examples where either digital or, just sort of not flipping the script, but using a different methodology to deliver information.
So the most powerful reality is the workflow itself. Sometimes we can't practice in the workflow because of safety issues or because of the uniqueness of things. And that's when augmented reality and when, simulations and those things make an effort in the learning process. But really, one of the powerful models for virtual learning that we, Bob Mosher and I developed many years ago was a model called GEAR, where you gather online virtually, but then you expand and apply expand and apply in the flow of work. So you have the spaced learning model, you gather, then you have them apply that to their real world of work. That's a great practice. Talk about reality, apply that in the real world of work, and then you report and receive feedback. The learner reports and receives feedback. That's GEAR. So I would just say that, the greatest practice that can ever happen is in the flow of work. The greatest reality where things are ever changing and so forth. As long as you can safely do that. Years ago, I was off Trafalgar Square in London.
Nice. In London, yeah.
Yeah, and at a bookstore. I'm addicted to books. And I found in this bookstore 16 little books, Learn in a Weekend. And they were the greatest little, under 100 pages, you could learn to scuba dive in a weekend. Well, I bought all 16 books. Flying home, I open up, I'm from Utah, right? I'm going to go to Bora Bora, scuba dive. So I open up scuba dive and I see this word that I had no idea what it meant. And then next to that word, it said burst lungs. And I realized that maybe I didn't want to learn on my own in a weekend if I could burst my lungs. Right. And so what that means is that there are some skills where the critical impact of failure is significant to catastrophic. Those we have to invest in formal learning. And those are where we invest those where the critical impact of failure is significant to catastrophic with virtual reality, simulations, as all of that, everything that we have. But where the impact of failure isn't significant to catastrophic, where I can fail and learn from it, that I can push into the workflow directly. I might treat it lightly in training, but not like I would those where the critical impact of failure is significant to catastrophic. And what I can then do is, with the help of a digital coach, with a performance support infrastructure, people can actually, when the first time they have to do that task, they can go to their digital coach and do it. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. Yeah.
This handshake, this blend between the formal, what we do formally and informally, so that we can optimize our time in the formal learning, because we simply don't have enough time today to train on everything. But we can take the time and employ the methodology that we need for those critical impact of failure tasks, and then move people, into the flow of work with that infrastructure that I'm talking about as they transition and transfer into that sustain phase of things. We did this for a client, a global client, consulting firm, and they had a support arm supporting them. They had teams in 3 different countries, 3 different parts of the world. The time to proficiency for those employees, once you were hired to proficiency, was 18 months to become truly proficient, fully proficient in their job. 18 months. They were leaving the job at around 18 to 20 months. Okay. So, so we implemented a 5 moments of need solution, train, transfer, sustain, this blend that we talked about. And pushing them into the workflow, getting them doing work in the actual work, that blend. Time to proficiency dropped from 18 months the first year to 9 months, the second year to 6 months to proficient. So can you imagine if you bring people to full job proficiency in 6 months, and they're, by the way, they didn't then leave at 20.
I was going to say, hopefully that also
but look at the productivity gain that you have there, right? And what is more, they were more productive coming out of that, and they needed less oversight. Significant impact, because we had a full solution, that accommodated people across those 5 moments of need, that accommodated them across train, transfer, sustain, that blended the workflow and the formal learning in a thoughtful, justifiable way.
Mm-hmm. So take me to some of the challenges of implementing this. One that I could think of off the top of my head would be that every single one of these is a custom solution, right? I mean, every organization is going to be different, every team is different, et cetera. So you're going to have to go in and design, where can learning be inserted, or how does, again, I don't want to make the mistake of saying you're going to insert these little micro things, right? Because that's pulling them out. But how do you work with a team, with a manager, to say, hey, I'm going to start putting learning inside this workflow? What does that conversation even look like?
Well, that's so here are the great obstacles from our perspective. One, it requires a mindset shift. You have to shift from a learning mindset to a performance mindset. You've got to be thinking about what learning is a means to an end. It is not the end in and of itself. So in 1984, I asked a question that changed the trajectory of my professional career, which was, learning is a means to what end? And I determined in organizational learning, it is the means to enable and sustain effective job performance. People being able to perform and do their jobs. That requires us to shift our mindset to the workflow, right? And so the first is the mindset shift. Second is resistance is proportional not to the actual impact of change, but the perceived threat of change. People right now who are focused fundamentally on learning are so overwhelmed with what they're doing now to suggest, oh, you ought to be thinking about transfer. And by the way, and sustain, and there's these other 2 moments or 3 moments: apply, solve, and change. And your solutions now need to take care of all of that. The first thing that happens is people go, I'm sorry. I've got more work than I can do now. And so what I try to tell them is what my 7th grade basketball coach told me when he pulled me out of a game, and I said, I'm working really hard out there. He said, that's true, but you're not working very smart. And because I was just chasing that basketball, and we were trying to do a zone, So the point is that there is a way to work smartly, and it starts at the very beginning in mapping the workflow and then aligning our training with the workflow and performance support. And when you build your performance support infrastructure first, focus on performance first, you build that first, it has all the content, and then you wrap your training around it. And so it's a slow build, shifting your skills. But once you're there, the footprint of effort isn't that great. But the resistance in the world of formal learning, looking beyond these beautiful events that we create, is a real challenge for some. Anyone who tastes this, anyone who steps into this world, doesn't ever want to go back.
Right.
But stepping into it requires you to shift that mindset. Go ahead.
Yeah. So that I guess, are you seeing, is the workplace or the workforce changing at all? I could see these stilted or, sort of structured, expectations around learning in organizations from, my generation, your generation, et cetera. Are you seeing that as we look at the millennials, as we look at Gen Z, et cetera, as they've taken over the workforce, at least in the United States, I think around the world, that their expectations for how they learn and what they learn are different?
Oh, well, yeah. But see, there are two worlds that we have to address. Anytime we step into an organization and we begin working with the real performers in an organization, they grasp this and love it, and the demand is significant. The challenge is that you've got to work your way into that place through L&D organizations, some of which are very protective of the traditions that we hold. And so the last to really oftentimes to grasp the significance of and power of this change is L&D, sadly. Now, there are remarkable visionaries, and I don't want to offend anyone on this podcast. I love this profession, and I have never worked with folks that I didn't just think were remarkable, in all of this. So this is a highly dedicated, competent profession, but there are these traditions that sometimes blind us and get in the way, and that's so unfortunate. We do at times get invited into organizations by the business line itself. That happens maybe a third of the time, and those are home run hits every time.
Interesting. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, and I'm not sure sorry, I had the next question there on the tip of my tongue, but yeah, like, so the blockages that you would see in order to get to workflow learning, it sounds like, unfortunately, the L&D department is often, I go, so I found my question again. So what sort of conversations have you had with those people in order to, again, help them become comfortable with the change that you're asking for? Right. And then also see a new identity in how they are supporting learning in the organization, right? Rather than creating trainings and creating, courses, et cetera, but like, being that digital coach, being that, that support infrastructure.
Yeah. So here's our experience so far is that they have to taste it, experience it, and understandably so. So we do what we call a rapid proof of concept, where we take a small area and with the methodology help them take an area that maybe isn't as threatening. There's not their careers are not riding on the success of that project.
Sure.
So, like one client, we actually did it for their internal L&D team so that they could actually experience this all, in their own team. And so a rapid proof of concept, just tasting it. Once you taste it, once you experience it, you don't ever want to go back, because of the power of it. Very seldom see that. But there's also a change management, change leadership element here. And sometimes you have your key stakeholders change, who come in with, suddenly you're making great progress, and those key stakeholders come in with that old learning mindset, and that gets in the way. And sometimes there change happens within L&D, and so I wish anyone who can taste and see this, it feeds every professional bone in our bodies. From a training perspective, I know not only where everyone is in the learning, but I also know where they are in their growth and development. I can measure, because we put this performance support tool and we bring it into the training, and it helps with the transfer, and it's this infrastructure, this digital coach. I can gather data real time because it's aligned to the work. It's supporting people as they then make that transition. I can measure time to effective performance. I can measure time to change performance. I can gather data to understand the real business impact of what we do. And I'm telling you, when you see that as a learning professional, you don't ever want to go back.
Is there any, final question for you here? Is there any advice that you give to L&D professionals that are listening now, or will be listening, sometime in the future to the recording of this? Where to start today, like how to begin today, books to read, obviously, go connect with you on LinkedIn, et cetera, or whatever. But like where would you, what's that advice that you'd say in order to get moving on this?
Well, the first advice is I would invite every learning professional to ask sincerely, internally, yourself this question: learning is a means to what end? And if you come up with the conclusion that it is the means to enable effective performance on the job, then the path is pretty clear. We have nonpartisan, is that the best way to say it? Workflow Learning Alliance. We've about 1,000 people in it today, but it's an alliance that you can get to at the 5momentsofneed.com, at 5momentsofneed.com, the number 5 momentsofneed.com. You can get that. We also have a workflow learning free digital book that has the thoughts that Bob and I have had about all of this. We're doing our best to just help the world know it. Our mission is, we have a company and we do work, but I'm an old guy and I'm not in this profession a lot longer. And we just want to, Bob and I just want our profession to be changed for the better in a permanent way. And so the Workflow Learning Alliance, the ebook, all of that is just to help anyone move forward and work with this. So,
Con, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your very busy day to talk with us today. I really, really appreciate it. I love the conversation. I love the reflections, and I love the overall, just as you said, once you get a taste of it, you never go back. I feel like we've all had those moments, those aha moments. And so let's hope for more of those in the near future. And thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.